Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jason, and if we can go to the next slide, please, this would be good. We are interested in social data. I'm a market researcher, or more accurately, a media researcher by background, worked in radio, magazines, television, as well as on the supply side for a long time too. And in my world, a question that's becoming very interesting is this: what happens when market research collides with social analytics? I think this is an important question for everyone in this room, because when I look at market research today, there seem to be two cultures which don't really mix. We've got the traditional established market research culture. People in that culture consider themselves to be very rigorous, and they consider people from the social analytics side of the fence to be number-wanging cowboys, was one of the best names I heard used. But from the other side, the guys who do the social analytics think that everyone here, perhaps, doesn't get technology, is very process-orientated and incredibly conservative. And so there's a natural antipathy between the two communities, and this is really coming together in a new place, which is television. And I've just realized there's a clicker here. I don't have to keep asking for the slide to move, do I? Brilliant. There we go. And television's great because official audience ratings are about as good as market research can get. It's incredibly rigorous, as it needs to be, because it forms the basis of trading platforms. It's a currency for selling advertising. And something really interesting happened back in September of last year. The final episode of Breaking Bad was aired on US television. It became the most tweeted TV show in history. 9.5 million tweets were authored around that show. But the really strange thing is that that episode of Breaking Bad didn't even make it into the top 10 of the official Nielsen audience ratings for that evening. Now that's a huge paradox. The most tweeted show ever doesn't even break into the top 10 of the audience ratings. And we'd like to understand that better. Now, to tell a story, if you kind of go at this question from a traditional market research perspective, you conclude that, well, Twitter doesn't tell you anything at all about the way people are relating to a television show. Just look at the ratings, they're the truth. But consider this. If we went back in a time machine to 1964 and thought about Star Trek, if we look at the official audience ratings for the first season of Star Trek for NBC, what we'd find is that it performed really poorly. In fact, in its first season, it only averaged a position of about 52 out of 94 shows measured altogether. Now, this really troubled NBC, so in the second season, things didn't improve, and they were going to axe Star Trek. But something remarkable happened, and what happened was this. There was an orchestrated letter-writing campaign from a very passionate fan base for the show, love-bombing the network, saying, please don't kill this show. And that actually saved Star Trek for a third series. But what NBC did was move it from prime time, where it hadn't been performing to expectations, and put it in the Friday night death zone. And of course, it didn't get any better. And after the third season of Star Trek, it was axed. Now, we all know that isn't where the Star Trek story ended. And the question I've been asking myself, and I put to you guys, is if we went back to 1964 and looked at the information, the data that NBC had available to make their decisions, what would we have concluded? Was there anything in that data that would have foreshadowed the multi-billion-dollar content franchise value of Star Trek? And the data that would have been available would have been either the official TV ratings, which is traditional market research, or that fan base activity, all of those letters. Now, with hindsight, we know that there was nothing in the official market research that pointed to the future of Star Trek. Otherwise, it wouldn't have got axed. But maybe there was something in that letter-writing campaign that should have given us a clue. Now, if we take this into 2014, we're in a new world. We're in a world where social networks can connect us with the fan base of just about anything. In fact, you're looking at a map that one of my other companies, Dollywagon, produced, which is the IIeX influence community, and you can see most of the people that have chaired a session today seem to have been picked off this map. That's a great example of like a community that's passionate or interested in something making a life for itself on social media. And so the question I'm asking is, how do we use that information to look for stuff which maybe traditional market research can't give us in the first instance? And it's that intrinsic inherent value that might be living within social data that I'm interested in, because I take all of the arguments on board that it's not representative, it's not statistically structured, and all of that kind of thing. So my company, Colortext, has built a platform. I know this is just about the most uninspiring image of that platform I can present to you, but that's normally something that's reassuring for people that want hard quantitative facts and are used to buying quantitative data, because what I'm going to show you doesn't feel like quantitative data. If anything, it feels like qualitative data at quantitative scale. So the question I'm trying to answer at the moment, and we're applying it in television because television's an easy place to start. It's a bit like hunting for planets that revolve around distant star systems. You can find the Jupiter-sized planets first, and that helps you get better because eventually it's going to help you find the Earth-sized planets. That's the kind of process we're going through. But the question we want to know is, what can social media reveal about the short and indeed the long-term prospects of a TV show? Probably over and above what you'd have got from normal market research. And we're going to do it by looking at one of my favorite shows, which is Sherlock. Now, the new series of Sherlock from the BBC was first aired in the UK and I think around the world on the 1st of January. And it just went ballistic on Twitter. And I'm going to show you some stuff that we found. This is a very simple graph. This is about as simple as I could make it. The tweet volumes, and what you can see is there's a big volume peak of tweet activity around the start of the show, which is that first line with the peak, and we take 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after the show, 90 minutes of the show in the middle, and then a big peak at the end when people tell you what they felt. We can now kind of genderize, awful word, probably grammatically incorrect, about 45% of all of the tweets that we collect. That's a confident kind of gender assignation. That will get better over time, I can assure you. But what we're doing here is we're trying to capture, I feel, very complex emotional responses, because people's responses to a TV show, in fact, to a lot of things in life, are not black and white. We're going to look at some minute-by-minute analysis of that roller coaster experience that people go through when they watch a show as exciting as Sherlock. We're going to try and distinguish between all of the conflicting, very often conflicting and nuanced emotional responses that people shout out through social media. And within that, we can begin to detect the kind of patterns of audience engagement that successful shows engender. And we want to take these lessons and apply them to lots of other categories. Now, the first thing I need to explain to you is that we're not a sentiment analysis company. We do text analytics, we use semantics, this is true. But sentiment analysis is kind of made very, very black and white, people's understanding of whether a computer can understand what people actually say. And this is a good example. Our positive sentiment capture ability is as good as anybody's. And what it shows you here is that things stay pretty flat during the course of the show, and then there's a big positive peak as the show ends, which is great. But what we can learn to do is say, well, is that the whole story here? When we look at other emotions, in this sense, people saying that they're expressing some level of interest or engagement, we find a slightly different perspective. We find that this seems to peak before the show. This is a great leading indicator of high anticipation. And we're learning that when we see these peaks of anticipation before something's due to happen, it's usually a pretty good predictor that something big is going to happen for the company or the brand behind that product. And this is a great example of what it looks like in the flesh. This is one of the tweets that's very representative of this interest engagement kind of expression. And it comes from Ida. I didn't put my glasses on. That's a really big mistake. I'm so excited about Sherlock, I'm about to pee my pants. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never managed to get someone to say that in a focus group. There's something about social media that just seems to liberate people, and we really get some fantastic texture. But that isn't the whole story. I mean, The problem with sentiment analysis is that people are very, very ambiguous in their use of language. And this is a great example. We've got what would be a classic negative sentiment emotion, which is sad or unhappy. We can see that females seem to be expressing more sadness than males, if you want to put it that way. But when you read the kind of tweet we're talking about, Tasha says, "I was crying in the shower because I'm so excited for Sherlock." And my mum, she knocked on the door, and I just screamed, "It's okay, it's happy tears, don't worry." Now you tell me, is that positive, is that negative? There are nuances in language, it's complicated, and we shouldn't be expecting black or white metrics when we're working with this kind of unstructured natural language, which, if we're going to take social data seriously, we're going to have to do. Other things we can do, this is people expressing personal thoughts and feelings and indeed opinions. And we can identify these markers quite readily. And 10 minutes in, we've got people saying things like, "I waited 2 years for a fucking bungee jump." Now, if you saw the program, you might realize that at the beginning they were trying to explain how Sherlock Holmes didn't die when he jumped off the top of Bart's Hospital in London. And what's happening here is that the writers have been picking up on that kind of social media discussion about the show of the last series and have played with it. And they've been mucking around with the expectations of their consumers, which is a very brave thing to do. Because a few minutes later, you find out that what you thought was the explanation was actually just a theory. And as you see here, someone's saying, "I bet a lot of people feel quite stupid now." It's a very brave thing to do with your consumers, but that's what made this show such a hit. Brand owners need to perhaps be a little braver themselves. 40 minutes in, we get something else. This is people expressing enjoyment and amusement. And "I ship Molly and Sherlock so hard." And I thought at first that was a spelling mistake. But if you read the definition of what ship means from the Urban Dictionary, which is an absolutely vital resource for people, certainly in my company, I suggest in yours as well, you can see there's this underground language developing, which is absolutely fascinating. And we're beginning to get an insight into something that I call fan culture. Then we've got something called knowledge, understanding, and awareness. This is the dramatic peak of the show, and it's actually where Sherlock Holmes apparently can't defuse a bomb on a London underground carriage. And we get people getting really emotional because they've never seen Sherlock Holmes, stumped for an answer before, and people are really drawn in, they're engaged, and they're fully implicated in the drama. And then we find out that he's played a really rotten trick on poor old John Watson. And Sherlock, you fucking piece of shit, you know how to defuse it. Fuck, I love you. There's a lot going on in that tweet. And it begins to show you the way that you can play with people's emotions and expectations if you're a brand. But getting this in normal research contexts, I've found really difficult. And I'm almost getting it for free through social media. So, other things that we find, because we need to wrap up now, is that we see big post-match discussions, which are great. You can see the fan base really talking about the emotional relationships between characters and starting to fantasize about them. There's a whole load of pornography about Sherlock and Watson on Tumblr, if you want to check it out. Emotions, sad, unhappy, the feels. Again, you'd think this is a negative emotion, but it's not. I'm happy and sad and annoyed and exasperated all at once. Why? The feels. And I just love this explanation of what the feels is. It's very small on screen. The wave of emotion that hits you like a truck and leaves you thinking, fuck man, why? I can't get this cost effectively through normal qualitative research. It's something that I find very difficult to get through normal online quantitative surveys, and yet it's all out there, but we need a way to deal with it. So what is social data adding to the picture? I think this data is very authentic. As you see, it's incredibly colorful, but it's time sensitive. These are people punching the air or punching the cushion at that moment, and we're not killing that moment by asking a question, and I think that's really important. It captures many of the, I didn't know that. The real strength but weakness of traditional market research is that it asks questions. And if you can't conceive of the question, you're not going to get the answer. What we're doing is listening, and that's a different kind of practice for many of us in this room. And it doesn't represent all of the audience, we know that, but I think it does represent very influential bellwether consumer groups, and I think that can be very important. And you think about the Star Trek example, it's clear why. So, key language patterns signal an emergent fan base. We can find this now. We're getting better at it. When we do that, it can help us to protect and nurture anything about a brand that makes it successful, and we can plan that crossover from niche to mainstream. And my final thought is, look out for social media fan culture, because it could be indicative of a long-term win for any company. Thank you very much.